I want to, first of all, to thank you all for being here today at this very important event, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the third annual International Holocaust Remembrance Day of the Tampa Bay area. So I want to, first of all, before proceeding with the program, I'd like to start with the proclamation from the city. And let's welcome the Executive Director of the Tampa Bay Trade and Protocol Council, Deborah Wilkinson.
Good afternoon. Before I begin, we don't realize what goes into these kinds of events, and I'd really like to thank Council Correspondent Vincent Genovese and his lovely wife Linda for putting this together for the last 3 years, and also involving the Tampa Bay Trade and Protocol Council, the mayor and the county to be able to do these wonderful events, but especially this one because it means so much to our community and it means so much to our world. So in saying that, I'd like to start off by reading. I'm representing Mayor Buckhorn today. Mayor Buckhorn could not cancel some of the engagements he already had. Vincent and I tried for 6 months, but you know that he was with you last year as well. So he wanted to send his best, but not only that, he has written a beautiful proclamation for all of you. Whereas the Holocaust resulted in the deliberate murder of millions of people prior to and during World War II, including 1/3 of the Jewish people, along with countless members of other minorities such as Roma and Sinti citizens, ethnic Poles, people with disabilities, homosexuals, and political and religious opponents. And whereas reaffirming the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which proclaims that everyone is entitled to all the rights and the freedom set forth therein without distinction of any kind, such as race, religion, or other status, the United Nations General Assembly designated January the 27th as an International Holocaust Remembrance Day in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, and it is a day of global observance. The significance of the date commemorates the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp where more than 1 million people died by Soviet troops 70 years ago on January 27th, 1945. And whereas in the memory of the victims of the Holocaust, the 2015 theme for International Holocaust Remembrance Day is Keep the Memory Alive. A reminder that this dark period, from deportation to incarceration to freedom, transformed the lives of those who endured it, and it serves as a guiding force for future generations and a reminder to all of the dangers of hatred, bigotry, racism, prejudice, and whereas in observance of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the Consulate Corps of Tampa Bay, in cooperation with the United Nations Association of Tampa and the Holocaust Museum of Florida, will host a public program at the Italian Club of Tampa in historic Ybor City, Florida, on Sunday, January the 25th, 2015, and the event will include a candle lighting ceremony, reflections, and presentations by guest speakers and music, and now therefore, Bob Buckhorn, by virtue of the authority vested in him as the mayor of the city of Tampa, Florida, do hereby proclaim January 27th, 2015 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day in the city of Tampa, Florida, in memory of the victims of the Holocaust and in honor of all the survivors, as well as the rescuers and liberators, and further proclaim that we, as citizens of the city of Tampa, should strive to overcome intolerance and indifference through learning and remembrance. Dated in Tampa, Florida, this 25th day of January 2015. Bob Buckhorn, Mayor. Thank you.
With your permission, I would like to acknowledge some key members of our community in Tampa, and it only takes a few minutes. First of all, I'd like to recognize the chairman of the Holocaust Museum of Florida, Nat Dulliner, and the past chairman, Marty Borrell, the board member, Rachel Worthington, and the executive director of the Holocaust Museum, Beth Gelman, the Executive Vice President, Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, Stanley Stoll, the President of the United Nations Association, Javier Alamillo, the Vice President, Michelle Zeller-Geigel, and also I would like very much to extend a very warm appreciation to the chairman of the Italian club, Joe Capitano, who has been very generous in offering the hall, not the hall, the use of the hall, for the last 3 years, and I think he deserves a big round of applause. We have with us also the Rabbi David Weitzman, and also the only female rabbi in Italy who came from Calabria, Italy, to be with us today, Rabbi Barbara Aiello. And we also have the researcher in the Italian Jewish Cultural Center of Calabria, who came also today, Professor Enrico Mascaro, the president of the Valencia Lakes Jewish Heritage Club, Neil Raphael, the Upper Tampa Artistic Director, Daniel Lipton, and from MacDill base we have the Colonel Andre Briere. We also have with us the former Major Liberator, Frank Towers. And also we have with us many senior military officers from CENTCOM that are with us, and they represent the countries of Bulgaria, Canada, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Ukraine, and Hungary. And lastly, I would like also to extend a very warm welcome to the Consuls General from Miami, who come every year to be with us, the Consul General of Canada, Louise Ledger, the Consul General of France, Philippe Leslier, who could not make it, but he said he's representing Honorary Consul Jean-Paul Fazot, Germany, Consul General of Germany, Jorgen Borsch, Italy, Adolfo Barato, and Israel, Consul Eliyahu Levy, and also the Consul General of Greece, Adamantia Klotza, and also all the honorary consuls representing 26 countries. 70 years ago, this month, the human extermination, the killing, the agony was about to end with the arrival of the Allied forces in Germany. By that time, 6 million innocent men, women, and children were murdered for no reason. But the only reason was they were Jewish. 6 billion plus 5 billion of other religious denominations. The United Nations set January 27th as the official International Holocaust Remembrance Day to coincide with the first camp liberation on January 27, 1945. And today, the international community of Tampa Bay and around the world gathered together, united in solidarity to honor their memory and also to pay tribute to all the Holocaust survivors, many of whom are with us today. And now I would like to ask the Rabbi Barbara Aiello to start the candlelight ceremony.
Buongiorno, benvenuti, Boker Tov, Shalom, and welcome. I would like to echo Vincenzo's words of welcome to all of you and thanks to everyone here, and a special thanks to our survivors from the Kobernik House in Sarasota. I'm so glad that you are here with us today. And we thank you, Vincenzo and Linda, for all you did to make this event happen 3 times now. We are so grateful. The date is September 1944, just one day before Rosh Hashanah, which would have been a happy, joyful time, except for one thing. It was Rosh Hashanah in Auschwitz. There was a buzz through the camp, inmates who eavesdropped on a conversation between two Nazi guards. Horrified, the inmates passed on what they heard. The commandant had decided that there were too many Jewish children in the camp. They heard that it would happen on Rosh Hashanah, and now just one day before, it looked as though that terrible rumor would come true. When guards separated the smaller children from the taller ones, it became obvious what the fate of the younger children would be. And so in fear and confusion, Rosh Hashanah morning arrived. Everyone was distraught, and no one knew what to do, except for one young man who before his deportation had been the new rabbi in his shtetl, his little village. And look at him. This brash young man was acting like a rabbi now, moving from group to group, offering words of consolation. And though many others thought he was just plain silly, this young rabbi, in the face of everything to the contrary, gave the little ones a message of hope. No one knew how he did it, but this silly, unrealistic rabbi had somehow managed to smuggle a shofar into the camp. The children, who by now had been isolated in a special barracks, heard that the rabbi had his shofar, and through the camp grapevine, the children got a message directly to the rabbi. The children said, "We want to hear the shofar too." And the adults were not so sure. Most of them knew that if the rabbi went to the children, he would be in terrible danger. And if he were discovered, there would be reprisals against them all. Some said that it was a crackpot idea to go where the children were. An idea that was just like that rabbi, silly and foolish and a dangerous thing to do. But the young rabbi would not hesitate, not even for a moment. He tied the shofar under his uniform, and as the sun began to set, he crept forward, sometimes crawling, sometimes on his stomach, slithering like a snake, slowly moving toward the children who were waiting for him. The rabbi untied the robe and put the shofar to his lips. But the children said, "No, wait. First tell us something. Speak to us before you make the sound." So the rabbi sat on the floor with all the children around him. He spoke of the great Jewish martyrs. He told of the sacrifices that so many Jews had made in terrible, tragic times. And for a long moment, everyone was silent. Then one child spoke up. She said, "Thank you, Rabbi, for risking your life to come here and give us the chance to hear the shofar." And another child said, "Rabbi, we are praying that you will survive, and if you do, promise us that you will tell all the other Jewish children to always be strong and brave, and to remember that God did not cause our deaths. People, terrible people, they made the choice to do this to us." So the rabbi took his life into his hands, and though it was foolish and dangerous, this rabbi, he just didn't care. He put the shofar to his lips. He made the Tekiah Godolah, the loudest, longest blast that he could. And the children heard it. But the camp guards, they didn't hear a thing. Because just at that moment of the shofar sound, the camp bells that signaled the children to line up, just at that moment, the bells began to ring. "If you survive," the children said to the rabbi, "promise you will tell our story." And with that, the children smiled and shoved the young rabbi and his shofar out into the night. So we have gathered here today for many reasons. Among them, we are here to keep that promise. We kindle light on 6 candles, each one representing 1 million of our murdered brothers and sisters, until we arrive at 6 candles for the 6 million. Today, we sit in warmth and safety among colleagues, friends, and family, but we make a journey. We make a spiritual journey back to Europe, back to the camp, back to the rabbi and his shofar, and the children who asked that he tell their story. Our survivors, those whose lives were destroyed by Nazi horror, our brothers and sisters who have joined us today, are living proof that a promise made is a promise kept. May the memory of those we have lost be forever for a blessing, and may they rest in peace knowing that no matter what, we are still here, we will carry on, Lador Vador, from generation to generation. We Jews stand hand in hand, side by side, and shoulder to shoulder. For all that has happened to our people, for all we have suffered, Baruch Hashem, grazie a Dio. Thank God, we are still here. And let us say, Amen.
Can we have please welcome the flag of the United States of America. May you take your seat, please? Now we have the Consul General of Italy, Adolfo Barato, assisting Mary Bogolski. Please turn around. If you can turn and face the audience, please.
Please turn around, Mary. Mary is the survivor of 3 concentration camps and was liberated by the U.S. Army's 30th Infantry Division. A wife, mother, and grandmother, Mary is devoted to speaking publicly. Over the years, she has shared her story with thousands of teachers and students and those who would deny the Holocaust.
Now the Consul General of Germany, Jürgen Bosch, please assist Dr. George Schulze, but he's not here, but we have Art Mayor.
We'd like you to stand and face
the audience.
We'd like you to face the audience.
Face the audience.
Art and his family are survivors of Nazi horror that began with the vicious pogrom known as Kristallnacht, which prompted Art's family to leave Germany in 1939, one day before Hitler closed the borders. Art is a U.S. Navy veteran who became a teacher and a school supervisor, a devoted family man. Any day now, Art will become a great grandfather.
And now we have Consul Jean-Carl Fall from France, please stand up, assisting Clara Benjamin Belkin.
Hungarian Jew who began playing the cello when she was only 6 years old. But Clara's life was altered forever when she and her family were deported to the Bergen-Belsen camp. Trapped in a boxcar for days, Clara was rescued by Frank Towers, who is with us today. Clara went on to become principal cellist with the Winnipeg Symphony and has mentored young artists all around the world.
Now we have the Consul General for Canada, Louise Ledger, escorting Alex Laris.
Alex Laris, along with his family, was forced into a Jewish ghetto and then to the Bergen-Belsen camp. Near the end of the war, young Alex was forced yet again into another airless cattle car, but thankfully not for long. Alex was overcome with joy when the doors swung open and he saw his liberators, American soldiers. A U.S. Army veteran, Alex received a master's degree in electrical engineering, met and married his lovely wife, and relocated to Seminole, Florida. Thank you, Alex.
Now we have a Consul General of Greece, Adamanta Klotzer, escorting Paul Cuffert.
And Helen. When Paul was a little boy, just 7 years old, we'll wait till they light the candle. Paul was a little boy, just 7 years old. German soldiers sprayed him with tear gas, an event that prompted the family to leave Prague and run for their lives. A journey that took them through Beirut and onto the Patria, the ship made famous in the Exodus film. When Paul's wife Helen was still a child, she was threatened with deportation to a Nazi concentration camp. When her father was murdered in Dachau and her mother became suicidal, little Helen saved her mother's life. Thanks to the generosity of Italy's national airline, Alitalia, Helen and Paul finally realized their dream. They came to the United States.
Now we have
Thank you, Helen and Paul.
Consul of Israel, Levi, escorting Rose Rosen.
By the Nazis and sent to the notorious Auschwitz death camp, Rose Rosen is the only one of her family to survive. First a slave laborer and later a victim of infamous Dr. Mengele's torture and experimentation, Rose has courageously recounted her story as part of the Holocaust Remembrance project at the Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg. Rose was liberated from Auschwitz exactly 70 years ago on January 27, 1945.
Mark time. March. Left. Hold guard. Hold.
Thank you, Color Guard. They're Color Guard from CENTCOM on McDill. We appreciate you coming. If you have a prepared speech, first I'd just like to say one of the cardinal rules of show business is you never follow an act bigger than yours. I think I've failed spectacularly today. We'll all agree. But it is a true honor to be in the presence of you survivors today, as well as everybody else in the hall. These men and women remind us through their experience in the camps that men are capable of profound evil. But through their lives after the horrors of the Shoah, as we've heard here today, they show us that mankind is also capable of great compassion and forgiveness. I'm Colonel Andre Briere. I'm the Vice Commander of MacDill Air Force Base, and I'm here representing the men and women, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who serve right here at MacDill, and I bring their thoughts and prayers with me today as well. Each year on the 27th, as we've heard, the world comes together to celebrate the most barbaric crime in human history. We recall the 6 million Jews and millions of other innocent victims who were murdered by the Nazi Party, not because of anything they had done, but because of who they were and what they believed. We mourn lives cut short and communities torn apart. They will always be in our memories, they will always be in our thoughts, and they will always be in our prayers. For the United States Armed Services, these events are not a distant memory. Our modern military was forged in the crucible of World War II and the fight against the Axis powers. And while I'm here representing the armed forces today, I also stand before you, as many of you, as a first-generation son of Europe. Those of us from Europe feel an even closer connection and more acute horror that these crimes were committed among and sometimes by our fathers and grandfathers. But for those of us who are Americans, and particularly those who have served in the military, we feel a visceral pride in our role in liberating these camps and punishing the perpetrators. Today we proudly carry forward the legacy of the soldiers and airmen who liberated Buchenwald on the 11th of April, 1945, Dachau on the 29th of April, Mauthausen on the 5th of May, as well as the smaller camps of Flossenburg and Dora-Mittelbau. American forces not only brought freedom to the survivors of Nazi horrors, but they also made sure that in its aftermath, the world would know what had happened. On the day of Dachau's liberation, Colonel William W. Quinn of the U.S. 7th Army told a reporter that here our troops found sights, sounds, stenches, horrible beyond belief, cruelty so enormous as to be incomprehensible. In the days after Allied forces captured these first concentration camps, General Eisenhower, General Patton, and General Bradley themselves inspected a camp. They learned that the atrocities that had occurred there, they were, in Eisenhower's words, atrocities beyond the American mind to comprehend. Eisenhower ordered every American soldier in the area who was not on duty to take the time to tour these camps so that they could themselves see what they were fighting against and why they were fighting. These soldiers became not only liberators but witnesses. He also ordered that all German civilians living near these camps be forced to tour and clean the camps after liberation, forcing them to confront the savagery committed in their names and by their countrymen. But the commitment of our armed forces to the survivors of Nazi atrocities did not end with liberation. In the aftermath of the war, we cared for the survivors, and we helped reunite families. And though we know what good was done and that lives were saved, we must always remember that more than 6 million Jews perished under Hitler's cruel reign. That's a burden that all of us must carry, not just the generation of World War II, but every generation, must fight anti-Semitism, racism, and the victimization of religious minorities, with anti-Semitic terrorism openly showing its face this past month in Europe, and Christian and Jewish religious minorities being purged and murdered throughout the Middle East, even as we sit here today. It is clear that the great evil acted on by Hitler is with us still. We must always fight it. We must never give it harbor. That is why we boldly say, together, never again. Thank you.
My name is Frank Towers, former major in the U.S. Army. I'm going to tell you a little bit about an incident that occurred in connection to the Holocaust. Originally, I was from Vermont, way up in the North Yankee country. I came down here to Camp Blanding, and through the course of time, 4 years, we trained at Camp Blanding, Fort Benning, Camp Forest, Tennessee, Camp Addador, Indiana, all over the country, the eastern part. We were being trained as soldiers. Soldiers to fight Hitler, to retain or to recover the land that he had conquered in Western Europe, France, Belgium, Holland. Never once was the word Holocaust ever mentioned. Perhaps the word Holocaust had not even been invented at that time. This is 1940, 41, 42, 43. We were never trained to be humanitarian. We were soldiers sent to fight a war against a trained German army. Nothing had ever been mentioned to us about the concentration camps that were being numbered around Poland, Germany. We had heard rumors in the newspaper occasionally that some Jew had escaped from some camp somewhere, nobody knew when or where, made his way back to his home country and told the population, went to the synagogue, told the people. Thousands of Jews are being gassed and cremated. The rabbis and the elders didn't believe him. They basically ran him out of the synagogue. He was crazy. No human segment of humanity would ever do to another segment of humanity what this guy was saying. They just couldn't believe it. Another one escaped. He was talking about tens of thousands of Jews being sent to the gas chambers, crematoriums. Crazy. The German people are nice people. They're well educated. They're high cultured people. They wouldn't do anything like that. So that's where it stood. How could we here in America be expected to believe what we were reading in the newspaper when the Jews back at home didn't believe one of their own people? However, we went to Europe, fought through France, Belgium, Holland. We didn't see any of this stuff. Propaganda. We did the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 44, 45. See any of it there. Then we came on up into the western part of Germany. This was in January, February of 45. We saw nothing. We crossed the Rhine River on the 24th of March, 1945. Now don't forget, the end of the war is coming. 8th of May, 1945. Only a month and a half. have seen nothing. We captured the city of Hanover on the 10th of April. We captured the city of Brunswick. And our next objective was the city of Magdeburg. And that would be the last city that we would capture, because that's on the Elbe River, and this is where we were to meet the Russians. So we were to halt our advance at Magdeburg. So Magdeburg was the end of the line. Now, after capturing Brunswick, we moved on to a small town of Hillersleben. At Hillersleben, there was a large German air base and a research facility, consequently several block barracks and a small hospital and several private homes. Fine. We moved on to the next little village of Farsleben. Farsleben was a small town of about 1,000 people, nestled in a little valley. Now, our 30th Infantry Division was leading the attack, and of that, the 743rd Tank Battalion was the point. They were the first ones to go forward. And after the liberation of the village of Farsleben, they came up over a little hill and looked down into the next little valley, and there they saw a train, 40, 45 cars, just sitting there. A few people were circulating around outside of the last two cars because they were passenger cars. The rest of them were freight cars, or what we call cattle cars. Now, these cattle cars are about half the size of one of our American freight cars. In each one of these cars was approximately 75 to 80 Jews. Now, through communication with one of the people, we found out a little bit about the story, about where they came from. This train had come from Bergen-Belsen. We had never heard of Bergen-Belsen. We never knew where it was. It was only about 50 miles north of us, but it was over in the British zone. But this was one of the concentration camps, and we never heard anything about it. General Kramer saw the handwriting on the wall that the British Army was closing in on him. And he thought he'd try to get as many of these Jews out of there and get rid of them by sending them somewhere else. So in the early days of April, he loaded up 3 trains, each one about 2,500. The first train made a circuitous route, which took about 20 days to reach Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was a notorious death camp. They had a crematorium there, they had gas chambers there, and they had huge pits dug in which they deposited the remains. That's where these people were destined to go. The second train went out, and in 23 days, they were captured by the Russians at Trobitz. But the third train, the lucky train, they only took 6 days to make their trip to Magdeburg, where they could not get across the river because the bridge had been blown out. So the crew backed the train up to this little village of Farsley. And this is where we found this train. We had no idea, I'm speaking for the tank crew, so the 743rd Tank Battalion, that had come up over the brow of the hill, looking down into the valley to see this train out here. What in the world is that? And soon, a few of the people who had been on the passenger cars came up toward the tanks, and very few of them could speak English, of course. But one of the girls, Gina Rappaport, was from Warsaw. She could speak 7 languages. She began blabbering different languages. She didn't know who we were. And finally, she struck on Yiddish. And one of our tank commanders, George Gross, was a Jew. And he understood a little bit of Yiddish. So between he and Gina, they were communicating, and she told him the story about how they came from Bergen-Belsen to this point. Now, they had been in these train cattle cars for 6 days. This was the short route. They could only travel at night because anything moving on the roads or the rails, our Air Force would just come down and strafe it or bomb it. That was the end of it. So they consequently just moved these trains at night. So each evening, they would give these people their daily ration, once a day. A cup of soup, which was a big, maybe a 20 or 30 gallon pot of water with some potato skins in it, or maybe turnip skins, or maybe sugar beet skins. So in ladling out the so-called soup, if those people got 1 or 2 of those potato skins, they were lucky. Got a little piece of bread with it. That was their daily ration. Men, women, and children. Now, in one corner of this car, there was like a 5-gallon bucket with water in it. Now, if you can imagine a 5-gallon bucket of water for 75 people to last all night. Over in this other corner was another 5-gallon bucket, That was their toilet. Now, can you imagine the guy up in this corner wanted to get down to that bucket and make pee-pee? No way. He's not going to make it. It's going to run down his legs. This guy over here wants to get to this bucket. There's no way. They're crowded in there like sardines. They can't sit down. They can't lay down. The only way they get to sit or lay down is to pass out and collapse and just fall to the floor. Now, if you can imagine, when we approached those cars and sprung the doors open, the odor that came out of those cars was something terrific. We couldn't believe, we couldn't imagine that human beings were being kept in captivity in such circumstances. They virtually just fell out of the cars. They were so crowded in there. There were a few of them were dead. We were afraid that these people might have typhus, diphtheria, some other kind of diseases. We didn't want to touch them. We could approach them and talk to them, but we didn't want to touch them. They were so happy and elated to be free. This was their first taste of freedom. They wanted to hug us. They wanted to kiss us. They wanted to show their affection and appreciation to us for giving them their liberation. But we had to back off from them a little bit. And we see the condition that these people are in. We did what we thought was best. And we as Americans had our pockets full of crackers, candy, chewing gum, apples, something to snack on through the day, and we just unloaded this stuff, gave it to them freely, and no sooner did they grab it and stick it in their mouth, and gobble it down, they vomited it back up. Their stomachs could not tolerate the high protein food that we were giving them. They were getting too much volume at one time. They couldn't handle it. And we were actually making them sicker than they were. So quickly, our medics came on the scene, and they said, stop giving them food. You're making them sicker than they were. So we did. And they took our rations and watered them down like 1/4 and almost spoon-fed these people. Now on this train total, there were about 2,500 people. And of them, 700 were children. That is from 21 years of age down to 0. And many of those children who did survive have no recollection of this time period. Those children under 10 hardly ever remember anything about this whole situation. But nevertheless, the Germans were pretty meticulous about keeping records. And they had a record of the name of every person on that train. They had their birth date and their birthplace. So from that, and in later times, I was able to go through that list and determine who the children were by their birth date. And finding 700 children, I later started researching them and wondering whatever happened to them. Now, just before we go on any further, having rescued this train, excuse me, we did move on to Magdeburg 2 days later, and we captured the city of Magdeburg, 16th and 18th of April, and during that period of time, we overran another slave labor camp, which was a sub-camp of Buchenwald, the Poultry Ammunition Works. So this was 2 groups of 2,500 people that we had liberated within just a few days. And today, we have one of the survivors of the train, Alex Laris, and a survivor of the Poultry Ammunition Works, Clara Belkin. 2 of the survivors that I had helped liberate in 1945. researching these people, and as I said, I found 700 children on the list. I had just sort of arbitrarily assumed that half of them at this time are deceased. So we're down to 350 possible survivors out there somewhere today. And thanks now to the internet, I have found 275 of these children, some of whom are living here in Florida, most of whom are living in Israel, many of them still living in Germany, Hungary, France. Upon the liberation, they were scattered all over the world. Some of the parents, prior to the war in the late 30s, were farsighted enough to attempt to get a passport for themselves and their family, to get out of Europe before Hitler took over the whole thing. Some of them were fortunate enough they made it, but soon the Iron Curtain came down and they were locked in. So these are the people that were left behind, and those of whom we liberated in 1945, many of whom had passports to Chile, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Canada, you name it. They had passports from everywhere. And of course, in the process of repatriation, those people had passports and they were sent to those countries. And that's where they have grown up. Now, back several years ago, in collaboration with another young chap, we put out a website about this story. And it took about a year before we had the first hit. And it was from a girl in Australia, Lexi Keston. She emailed back, "I was a 12-year-old girl on that train." Bingo. She knew of 2 or 3 others there in Australia. They knew of relatives back in Israel. Then the snowball began to roll. And it rolled, and everybody knew somebody else. They had a cousin, they had an aunt, an uncle. And it grew to this list that I have of 275. I don't take any credit for being a hero, having liberated these people. I was one of a division, one of 15,000 men. I was doing my job. All the other 15,000, they were doing their jobs too. They were all liberated, although they may not have had hands-on experience as I did. But at this time, I am the last known surviving veteran who had any hands-on experience with the train and the Faulty Ammunition Works. It's been very rewarding to me to have been in contact with so many of these survivors and to learn a little bit about the history of each one, their education, and their occupation. You can't believe the vision that I will always have of those people as they come off of that train. Dirty, stinking, emaciated, lice infested, flea infested, stinking dirty. And they have risen up from the ashes and have become a great part of our culture and our society today.
Thank you to the Counselor Corps of Tampa Bay for sponsoring this very moving and meaningful event on the beginning of the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the extermination camps and other concentration camps. The Florida Holocaust Museum is honored to be able to participate in this event. Major Towers, we thank you and the other liberators for your valiant service to our country and to all of humanity. We also honor those today who survived the Holocaust, miraculously survived, and went on with great difficulty to rebuild their lives. Today we are hearing the stories of the liberators and the liberated. We must keep hearing and telling these stories and hearing and retelling them to our children, to our grandchildren, to people everywhere in order to prevent future genocides. This has never been more important than today, with the dark storm clouds of anti-Semitism and other hatreds once again billowing over many parts of the world. Telling and retelling these stories is the purpose of the Florida Holocaust Museum, which educates students and adults about the horrors of the Holocaust and other genocides. In a wonderful recent essay, Jonathan Sacks, the immediate past Chief Rabbi of England, wrote that storytelling is an essential part of a moral education. So today and every day, let us tell and retell, let us listen, and let us listen yet again to these very powerful stories, so that the words that were uttered in the wake of the Holocaust never again will remain true.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Toni Rindy. Thank you for allowing me to share a few moments of my story with you, lest we ever forget. I was born November 9th, 1940, in a city called Przemyśl, around 60,000 inhabitants, of which 25 to 30,000 were Jews. Large Jewish population. War broke out, and in the beginning of 1942, the Jews of Przemyśl were ushered into a ghetto. I went with my parents, my uncle, an aunt, my grandfather. Shortly after we were ushered in, we were still allowed to go out into the community, and my parents, especially my father, who was a very involved individual, was able to connect and get himself involved in giving food supplies out with the Wehrmacht, the army in Przemyśl. My father became friendly with a gentleman by the name of Albert Bettel. He was a lieutenant in the Wehrmacht. And when word of an action where they were gathering Jews to bring to the concentration camps became around in that area, my father went to Lieutenant Bettel and said to him, "You've got to help me. I have my family. Help me because they are going to take us away." Lieutenant Bettel, in spite of the orders of the Gestapo, sent 3 trucks into the ghetto and put 100 Jews on those trucks. Those trucks were driven out of the ghetto, and 100 people were settled for a few days within the city of Przemyśl. My family and I were put into the basement of the Wehrmacht office. Rather precarious place to be in, since the Gestapo was very much against what had happened. Lieutenant Bettel was my Schindler, my family Schindler. Saved our lives. Every day, Lieutenant Bettel brought an orange down into the ghetto, saying a baby needs to have fruit. So that helped a lot. After several days, we again were herded back into the ghetto. My father realized that something needs to be done. There's no way that they, as a family, are going to survive with a child. I, at that point, was just about 16 months old. My parents went out into the city one day with a carriage, taking a walk, and a woman comes up to my dad and says to him, "How can you take this beautiful little child into the ghetto?" And my dad very coolly said, "Well, what can I do? Can you help me?" And she said yes. The next day, arrangements were made to meet at a certain time, at a certain corner. They were to bring the baby carriage to the corner, turn around, and leave. And that is exactly what happened. My parents brought me to a corner in a baby carriage, left the corner. My father and mother stood and watched as she wheeled me away. That was the story, the beginning of my life during the war. I was hidden with this lady, wonderful lady, whom I called my aunt. I was with her for 3.5 years. She, from what I understand, my parents tell me, was very good to me. Of course, how would they know? They were not there, but I'm assuming she was. I was not allowed to go out by myself. I had to be with her all the time. Whenever anyone knocked on the door, I was to go find myself and hide myself in my room, make like I was playing toys, and certainly not talk to anyone at any time, because children talk. All you need to do is give a child the candy and all kinds of things, and all kinds of information to be found out. I'll fast forward quite a bit. My parents came after 3.5 years to pick me up. Well, that's great. I'm coming to pick up my daughter, but this daughter has no idea who these people are. And needless to say, refused to go with them. It took my parents close to 3 months to get me to be willing to go and live with them. My life during the 3.5 years with my aunt was not easy, as you can well imagine. But my life was even more difficult after the war when my parents picked me up. Imagine a child of 4.5, has no idea who these people are. I didn't know my parents. They didn't know me. They had been through untold horrors. They were hiding in the woods as partisans. And here you are, trying to establish a life. We finally managed to get together. My parents went from the city that I was living in, Przemyśl, into a city called Katowice, which was in Poland. My father was a very active individual and became very involved within whatever was left of the Jewish community. One night, we get a note pinned to our door. If you don't leave within 24 hours, you and your family will be killed. Now, mind you, this was after the war. This was by the Polacks. We left. We then went from Katowice to Prague, spent a little time there, went from Prague to Paris, spent some time there, from Paris to Holland. You may wonder, why did we travel and travel and travel? Well, my parents wanted to make sure that we were able to get a visa or permission to enter the United States. There were quotas all over. So whenever my parents heard that a quota opened up, we left and went to the area where the quota was open. And of course, by the time we got there, it was closed. There were many people trying to do the same thing that we were trying to do. We were very lucky in the fact that I had an uncle in this country that got caught here at a medical conference when the war broke out in Poland. We came to the United States, moved to New York, and became a family again. I could tell you lots of stories because I could go on and on and on, but I know that we're very tight for time, so I appreciate it, but just remember, it happened, and if anyone ever says to you, it didn't, let them come to me and I will assure them that it did. So please remember what happened, and in today's world, let us all fight never ever to allow this to happen again. Thank you.
I was born in the same town as my wife. We didn't know each other at that time. When the war broke out, I was 4.5. My sister was 2. Since we lived in eastern Poland, in Przemyśl, because of the Hitler-Stalin non-aggression pact, the so-called Ribbentrop Pact, we were occupied by the Russians for the first almost 2 years. So in a way, we were lucky, even though life under Stalin wasn't much fun. Because we were wealthy, we were persecuted for being capitalists, we were expelled from where we lived and moved to Lviv, another town about 60 miles or so further east, bigger town, where we weren't well known, so we could establish our life over there. And we lived there until the summer of '41, when Hitler launched his Operation Barbarossa, meaning the invasion of Poland and Russia. And that's when the persecution started. And by December of '41, all the Jews of Lviv were forced to move into the ghetto. And the ghetto was a very slummy part of town. And not only the Jews of Lviv had to go there, but also those of the surrounding villages. It was very crowded, and that's when the deportation started. Hitler, of course, had a very good propaganda machine with Goebbels, and they were telling stories. People are being resettled, moved east, or going to labor camps, and people bought that story. Mainly because of historical precedents. After all, Jews were kicked out of Spain under the Inquisition and from many other countries during history. There were pogroms in Russia, people were killed, beaten, property was destroyed. It was a passing fad, and they thought that this was indeed the case. But after a while, rumors started circulating that wasn't the case, and as the major pointed out, some people escaped and were telling stories that nobody believed. A Polish resistance fighter, Jan Karski, escaped from Poland to England and came to the US telling what was happening. Nobody believed him, for obvious reasons. But some people did believe that this was the case, including my parents, and they had to decide what are they going to do? What options do you have when you penned in the ghetto? Well, you could find a benevolent person to take you in and hide you, like my wife found, or like and Frank had. There weren't many such brave people because hiding a Jew was getting a death penalty if you were found. What Germans often did was, if they caught the Poles hiding a Jew, they would hang publicly the entire family, husband, wife, children, left them hanging in the public square for several days as a warning to others. So that wasn't a very good option. The other one was to escape into the forest and act as partisan. Polish winters are brutal, and you had to have some survival skills, being in the military or otherwise. My parents didn't have that, so that was not an option. So they finally opted to pretend that we are Catholics and escape from the ghetto and play the role. That was easier said than done, because in Poland, in those days, everybody, adult, had to have a state-issued ID, which in addition to the usual information, also had your religion. That was a minor thing, because Jews had typically Jewish names, even though Rindy in the US may sound more Italian than Jewish. In Poland, it was a typical Jewish name. And Jews had biblical first names. My name before the war was Jacob, my sister was Ruth, my father was Moses. It wouldn't fly. So we had to get forged papers with change of names, okay? Now, to do that, number one, you had to have money, and number two, those guys didn't advertise in the yellow pages. So you had to have connections. So, again, since we came from a wealthy family and managed to save some money that the Stalin didn't grab, we were able to get that. So, here you go, when we escaped from the ghetto in the summer of 42, I was 7.5, my sister was 5, and the survival of the family depended on those two young kids being able to stick to the story. The names have changed, the parents' names have changed, the last names have changed, where do you come from, what did you do before the war, we had to learn a whole new story to be able to pretend that we were who we said we were. And of course had to learn some rudiments of Catholic religion, the basic prayers. And we escaped from the ghetto, waited there a few days until things calmed down, and then had a hired guide who took us to another city. Why they picked Lublin, I'll never know, but that's where we wound up. And Lublin was right next to a major concentration camp by the name of Majdanek, where they had crematoria and gas chambers, and whenever bodies were being burned, we could smell the odor. At any rate, Poland was a police state under the Germans, so moving from one town to another was not like here. You can go from New York to Boston, set up, and no problem. But over there, you have to go through the police, you have to register, give a reason why you moved, and so on. You had to have an apartment assigned to you by the government. It was a mess, but somehow or other, my father managed to get all that squared away. And then there was a question of getting a job. Well, luckily, he spoke German fluently. He spoke German fluently because during World War I, they lived in Eastern Poland, which in those days was run by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And during World War I, there was fighting the Russians and the Germans. So the family moved to Vienna for 4 years, and as a young kid, he learned German and was fluent. So he found an ad, somebody was looking for a German translator. So he applied for the job and got it. The problem was that the company was manufacturing food products, and under the controlled economy, all the raw supplies or materials had to be supplied by the German authorities, in return for which they had to return so much finished product, which meant that he had to go to the Gestapo headquarters and negotiate with those guys and try to act tough to get the best deal he could for his bosses. Not an easy job, but he was a very personal guy, and he made buddies with the Germans, and they were actually doing him favors. At any rate, things went on, and somehow or other, his bosses, with two brothers, found out that we were Jewish. But being upstanding citizens, they helped us out. They nurtured us as to the finer, points of religion, how to behave when you go to church, and various holidays and so on. And they gave my father extra money under the table over and above the official salary that he was supposed to get, and they got him out of several hot spots. So they were named as righteous Gentiles of Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. I had to go to school where religion was a compulsory subject taught by a priest. I had to go to communion, to church every Sunday, communion, confession. I didn't tell him I was Jewish. And played the role to the hill. Now, there were a few people who were helpful, but there were also many who were not so helpful. Anti-Semitism in Poland was rampant, and they used this opportunity to get rich. There were people who made it their profession to try to ferret out Jews such as us who were masquerading as Catholics and denounce them. And they either did it just for the fun of it, or else to blackmail you. And once you run out of money to give them, then they denounced you. And it happened to us on 2 occasions, but luckily the war ended for us in the summer of '44 before we ran out of resources, so we made it. Incidentally, we hid anywhere from 4 to 10 members of our family in the basement of the house that the Germans gave us to live in. Although most of them are alive either in Canada or Israel. Some passed away. After the liberation, Majdanek was the first major concentration camp liberated by the Allies, in this case the Russians. The US got to Auschwitz, to Bergen-Belsen much later. So the Russians, whose prisoners of war were very badly mistreated by the Germans, almost as bad as the Jews, opened Majdanek as a museum, and they invited foreign dignitaries or officials, from England, US, France, to show what the Germans did. And they needed translators. And my father was able to speak some French and some English, so he got hired as a docent and was conducting the tours. So he took us, the children, my sister and I, to visit Majdanek a week or so after liberation in '44. So, I was about 9 and a half. My sister was 7. And the sights that we saw were just incredible, almost as bad as what the major described. And the prisoners were already gone, but the stench and the odor and the rotting bodies in the open trenches and the fragments of bone in the crematoria were still there. We visited Majdanek about, 20 or 25 years later, was greatly sanitized. So I didn't have it quite as bad as people who went to the concentration camp, but it was no picnic. Thank you.
come together to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, it's appropriate to take time, and as you heard from our last two speakers, to reflect on those non-Jews who risked their lives and often the lives of their families to save Jewish lives during the Holocaust. What you need to know is that there were rescuers in every country that was occupied by the Germans and their collaborators. And there was rescue in Auschwitz. More than 70 years ago, the world went dark, and for the Jews of Europe, a nightmare began, a nightmare that most thought would never end. Yet in every darkness, there are particles of light, and those of us in the Jewish community know those lights as the Hasidei Ha'omot Ha'olam, the righteous among the nations of the world, a very precious title. Men and women, not of the Jewish faith, who risked their lives, who had both the courage to care, but also the courage to act. Today I'm going to speak briefly about rescue. Who are the righteous Gentiles, how they helped, and why they risked their lives to save Jews. It is said that the Jews of Europe had choiceless choices, to go east, to go west. No one wanted them anywhere, any place. Choiceless choices. Once Jews were moved into ghettos, escape to the Christian or Aryan world was a major undertaking for a Jewish person, and it was not done lightly. So who in the Jewish community, you heard from Dr. Rindy, who would try to make a move to the Christian or Aryan side? Someone young, someone without family ties, someone who spoke the language of that country. Most Jews spoke Yiddish, and you tried to speak the language of the country without a trace of Jewishness. This composite profile suggests that many Jews, the religious, the uneducated, those with limited incomes, those who did not have the funds, were unable to go to the Christian side and pass as a non-Jew, whether it be a Protestant or a Catholic, or in Albania as a Muslim, or in what we know today as Serbia, also Muslim. Therefore, if you wanted a chance of survival other than having luck, you needed the help of a Christian. And what was mentioned before, the Germans employed the concept of collective responsibility. They wanted the Christian population to know what would happen if you helped a Jew in any way whatsoever. There were public executions. In Poland and in Eastern Europe, not necessarily Western Europe, the penalty for helping a Jew was death. And if you were a non-Jew and I denounced you because I thought you were hiding a Jew in your home, you, your family, and the Jewish person or Jewish persons you were saving were killed in a number of ways. And I would receive a kilo of sugar and a pair of boots, and if it were Ukraine, you might have gotten a liter of vodka. To hide a Jewish person was truly a matter of life and death. Yet the concept of collective responsibility did not stop Christians from helping Jews. If a Jewish person survived the Holocaust and was not in a ghetto or in a concentration camp or with the partisans in the woods, that person received help from a Christian, whether it was food, papers, shelter, transportation, or the very act of not being denounced. As insignificant as an act might seem to us today, the mere absence of that act could have proven fatal. What did rescuers do? Christians warned Jews about pending actions. You can look, go home, and read about the Danish rescue. The presence of a non-Jewish person who would take a Jewish person out of the ghetto or from one safe home in the Christian side to another. Jewish children in Italy and France, when they were being escorted from a convent to a safe house, to a farm, were told, look at your feet, don't look up, especially if a German officer or a German soldier came by. Perhaps the most important form of help was the provision of shelter, and shelters took all kinds. False closets. Jews hid in barns, they hid in haystacks. You talk to many Jews who hid in countrysides, whether it was in Italy or in France or in Germany or in Eastern Europe, they lived in earthen graves. They dug a bunker. Families who hid Jews had to be careful about purchasing food. You're a family of 4, you're now hiding 7 Jews. How do you find food for people that you're not supposed to have? You heard about identity documents. You also had ration coupons. You would shop in your town at different, if it was a bigger town that had more than one market, you would go to different markets. You would shop at different times of the day. If you were in a small village, you might send your older children 5, 10, 15 kilometers away to buy bread and eggs.
When a Jewish person got sick in hiding, you could not call a doctor. And when someone died, how do you bury a body that does not exist? And there are testimonies that were sent to Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Authority, Jews that were hid in an earthen bunker in Ukraine. Every day, the Christian family would bring down a chamber pot of food, bring up the body waste, and when one of my board members' brothers died in hiding, they sent down an axe, they dismembered his body over the course of a week, and it was buried in the garden of this family. When a Christian family said, yes, we'll take you in, nobody knew how long that war was going to last. Who were the rescuers? They came from all walks of life. There were peasants, there were laborers, there were middle class, rich, poor, members of the clergy, priests, ministers, and nuns. When you ask a righteous Gentile, why did you do what you did? They will tell you they did what any Catholic, what any Protestant would have done, what any Dane, Italian, or Frenchman would have done. But we know that was not the case. The rescuers were the precious few. For most of the people living in Europe at that time, if they were not a perpetrator, most were bystanders. Most chose not to get involved. Each act of rescue was different and each story is unique. The fact that it occurred and there were those who cared is important. I have met Christian and Muslim men and women from all walks of life who risked their lives and the lives of their families to hide, protect, and feed Jews. In many instances, total strangers. Not saints, these rescuers, but human beings who transcend the environs of prejudice and contempt and shielded Jews out of care, concern, responsibility, and love. I want all of our children and each of us here to be exposed to such wonderful people as Monsignor Beniamino Schiavo, a Catholic priest from Italy, who met the Korn family who had fled from Germany down into Italy. They were interned. He hid them, they were total strangers. And on Christmas Eve, 1943, he walked more than 8 hours through German lines to bring them food and comfort because he had hidden them up in a home in the mountains near where he had lived. We should know about Giorgio Perlasca, who saved scores of Jews in Budapest. We have a number of consul generals here. Well, the diplomats in Budapest got together, the Papal Nuncio, Raoul Wallenberg, Karl Lutz from Sweden, Angel Sanbris from Spain, and they came up with the concept of safe passports, Schutzpasses, protective documents. Giorgio Perlasca was interned. He escaped from an internment camp in Hungary. He knew the Spanish envoy, Angel Sanbris. Sanbris issued protective documents saying that certain Jews were Spanish nationals and they were protected. Sanbris fled for Switzerland and he said to Giorgio Perlasca, "You come too, I've made provision." Giorgio Perlasca refused to do that. He said, "I have work to do here in Budapest." Giorgio Perlasca was from Padua, Italy. He changed his name to Jorge, went into the Spanish embassy in Budapest and began issuing protective documents. He's known in many circles as the Italian Wallenberg. It is estimated that Giorgio Perlasca saved some 25 Hungarian Jews. Let me quote from a letter written. On April 5th, 1945, Dr. Hugo Duquesne, one of the Jews saved by Giorgio Perlasca, wrote, "On this occasion, we want to express the affection and gratitude of the several thousand Jews who survived thanks to your protection. There are not enough words to praise the tenderness with which you fed us and with which you cared for the old and the sick among us. You encouraged us when we were close to despair, and your name will never be omitted from our prayers. May the Almighty grant you your reward." Rescuers have taught us. They give us a legacy of hope for the next millennium. Stand up for the stranger in your midst. stand for the other side. Enter the battle to protect the threatened minority. For all of us, at some point, sometime, are a minority. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no heroes without villains. There are no Georgia Palaskas, Monsignor Shivos, without the Mengelas and the Himmlers. People ask how many rescuers there were. We do not know. Estimates range from 50,000 to 250,000. Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial, has recognized more than 25,000 men and women as righteous among the nations. Whatever the number, there were too few. But then again, there are always too few moral heroes in history. Jewish tradition teaches that for the sake of 36 righteous persons, the world is sustained. For the sake of 10 righteous persons, Sodom and Gomorrah would not have been destroyed. And the saving of one person is tantamount to saving the entire world. Many worlds were saved by Christian rescuers. Goodness is a powerful mirror. Goodness challenges us in a way that evil does not. Compared to Eichmann, I am a saint. But compared to Giorgio Perlasca or Teresa Giovannucci, who saved my friend's father, a leading rabbi of Rome, or Monsignor Shivo, how do I measure up? Would I unlock the door? Would I take in this frightened family? Would I keep them for days, months, years, knowing that discovery meant death? I leave you with the following. What would you have done some 73, 74 years ago if someone came to you and asked you to shelter them, to take their child, when discovery meant death? To hide someone who dressed perhaps differently than you, did not speak your language, and worshiped God in a different way? When you did not have enough food for your own family, what would you have done? We have many lessons to learn from Christian rescuers. Thank you.
If you are able, please stand for El Rachamim.
moment, this memorial prayer we offer to those who have passed on as a way of proclaiming our faith that God instills goodness in us and that we acknowledge the blessing of life itself to make the most of it. Yikadal, Yikadash, Shemei Rabbah. Yalama, Tibrach, Yiruteh, Yamlid, Malchuteh, V'chayechon, Uvyomechon, V'chayeh, V'chol Beit Yisrael, V'agala, V'zman Kariv, Yimru, Amen. Amen. Yeshmei Rabbah, V'rah, V'olam, Avnei Mayim. Yidbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitatar, V'yitaled, V'yitalal, Shmei, V'yishah, La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, ta'amiran yelama v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'rama, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. May you makes peace on high, give peace unto those souls that we remember, and give us strength to bring peace into our world. And let us say, Amen. Amen. Please be seated.
We are coming slowly to the end of the ceremony. I must tell you that when I first went to see Tony and John Brindy to visit them in their residence, I thought they were Italians, and I spoke Italian, and they said, "We are not." I said, "No, you are." We've heard many speakers talking about that many people in the very difficult time risked their lives to confront the evil, and they saved many human lives. And I think this gesture must continue. Ned and Donald talked about that the anti-Semitism is rising and the world is inflamed. It's burning, and we can feel the difficulty we may face. It is important that we all collectively take responsibility and stand on a position of fighting, confronting the evil. Our job is to talk about what happened, the Holocaust, although many do not believe that it happened, but it happened. So our responsibility, Jews or not Jews, is to go out and continue to tell the story. And I promise that next year, the International Holocaust will hold its event on Sunday, the 24th of January, provided I get the approval from Joe Capitano. Thank you.
Buonasera, good evening. Vincent asked me to give you some closing remarks. Frankly, I don't think there are closing remarks to do, because we are here to remember and keeping remember forever. So no closing remarks, but just a few things. As you know, Italy is a kind of democratic country, is a country that is proud of being a country that respects the freedom of press, the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. And I think who remember the role of many Italian families who helped Jewish, Italian or non-Italian Jewish during the Second World War. But I think also that we have to remember that at the time we were allied with the Nazi regime. And so I think that we have also to remember that we were responsible in some ways of what was happening at the time. That's why I would like to thank really most sincerely the organizers for this event, and especially as Italian, because of our role and because of our responsibilities. And not only on behalf of the Italian community in Florida, but of course on behalf of all the consular community here present, and especially on behalf of the German colleague that would like to come here with me. Grazie, thank you.
still thrive.